Welcome to John Martin Talks, where we battle ignorance and apathy daily. The growing ignorance of just how special this experiment we call the United States of America is, and the apathy that we can't or won't do anything and everything to save her. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about this House bill called SB1 or HB1. I guess it's a House and Senate. And it basically has to do with eliminating constitutional elections going forward. Basically, they're trying to remedy a situation which for the Democrats means codify the cheat by mail. I don't know how else to put it. And we'll get into some of the details of that in just a moment. And then if we have time, which I'm going to try to make some time, there was a horrific crash in California yesterday that left, I think, 13 people dead and many seriously injured. And I'm going to make a case that basically it was Joe Biden and the Democrats' fault, that they literally have, in a way, blood on their hands. So we'll talk about that. But before we go any further, we always got to mention our sponsors. Our primary sponsor is BDU, otherwise known as Big Daddy Unlimited. No matter when or where you're watching the show, look above the video. You'll see a description of the show, and you'll see links to our sponsor and various other things. Click on the Big Daddy Unlimited, the BDU link, and you will go directly to where you can get factory direct pricing on guns and ammunition delivered directly to your door, including over 100,000 of other items related to the Second Amendment, from guns, ammunition, down to tactical gear, and even survival gear, all of that kind of stuff, as well as just swag for the Second Amendment. And I call Big Daddy Unlimited your Second Amendment headquarters because that's exactly what they are. Because not only can you get factory direct pricing, as I say, on guns and ammunition delivered directly to your door, but they defend your Second Amendment on a daily basis. So check them out. Then we have patriotthreads.org, apparel with a purpose. If you use the promo code JMT, John Martin Talks, just the initials, you'll get 20% off patriotthreads.org. And if you want to rock some of the finest patriotic apparel, check them out. They're a total fulfillment center, which means they can help you with charity events and everything else, help you fundraise for the charity of your choice. And they have a patriotic theme and they support veterans. So check out patriotthreads.org. Remember the JMT code for 20% off. Then, of course, Recoil TV. We're expanding all the time with Recoil TV. They're in partnership with Big Daddy Unlimited as well. They have a YouTube channel. Of course, we have a YouTube channel. Let's spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks, and you can go there. We need more subscribers and views on our YouTube channel. But Recoil TV has a YouTube channel, and we have our shows archived on there. Recoil is also all about the Second Amendment in that they produce videos, top-notch videos, about all issues from hardware to actual guns and ammunition surrounding the Second Amendment. Recoil TV. Check it out. All right, let's get into the show here. We're going to start with a Washington Post article. The voting wars come to Capitol Hill. Democrats eye national elections overhaul amid GOP crackdown. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, what this is just like that meme. I couldn't show it any better than that. The Constitution is on fire. And I'm going to get into details, but let me just give you a broad overview. Essentially, the way the federal election goes, if you want to call it that, for president, we don't really have a federal election. We have, in a sense, 50 state elections, and of course, there's some territories in that. And each state can set the basic parameters of the election laws. They don't set the date, although they can do with early voting and that, but the date is set in the Constitution. But the election laws are actually passed by the individual states. And this is the most important part of this. Only the state legislators, in other words, the House and the Senate within the states, some of them call them different things, they're the only entity that is allowed to change election law within the state. Not the governor, not the Supreme Court, not Stacey Abrams down in Georgia with consent decrees for the Secretary of State. No one but the state legislature can change the election laws. And that was the crux of what the major complaints were by Texas, and of course several other states, including Florida, joined with them to say that essentially that the any changes that were done outside the legislative process, supposedly around the pandemic, so to speak, were unconstitutional, and they were, and we'll get into some of that in a minute. So what the Congress is trying to do under the Democratic leadership and Joe Biden and the White House, who's already basically signed off on the bill, they're trying to make what happened in 2020 with the changes, like extending voting times, basically the mail-in ballots going out to everybody and mass mailing, all of those things. They're trying to make it. Not only are they trying to make it nationalized, but they're trying to restrict states from doing their constitutional duty and their constitutional right to actually have things like voter ID laws, integrity issues, and we'll get into the details in a moment. All right, let's get on with the story. The turbulent debate over the nation's elections reached Congress' doorstep this week when House Democrats poised to pass sweeping nationwide standards. They're not really supposed to be nationwide standards. They're supposed to be state standards for voter access Wednesday, just as Republican lawmakers in dozens of states moved to restrict polling access after Donald Trump's November loss. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that last statement is a complete and total lie. When they say move to restrict polling access, that is what they always accuse the Republicans, no matter what, is restricting voting. That is a lie. What the Republicans are trying to do is make sure we have an integrity in voting. The primary thing they want in most places is voter identification. And if you think about it, I mean, it's ridiculous. I tried to look up this video that I actually saw a few years ago. I couldn't seem to find it, probably because it's, has the wrong narrative for the current times. But they went into Detroit. I remember it well. And they interviewed Black Americans in Detroit. And they asked them, how hard was it for you to get an ID? And they said it's simple. There's various ways that they can get IDs. From their Division of Motor Vehicles or driver's license stuff. Like here in Florida, you can get a state ID even without a driver's license, that kind of thing. And many states have the same thing. And they basically said it was no problem whatsoever. And they even went into inner city neighborhoods and people were saying the same thing. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, if you think about this, I sometimes I'm wrong, but on this, I believe I'm very right. It is racist to me to insinuate that based on someone's skin color, they're not able to get an identification card. You can't do anything in this country without an identification card. You can't even exercise safe food stamps without an identification card. You can't get your baby out of the hospital without an identification card. So it's absolutely insane, and I think I can make a strong case that it's racist to insinuate that any group has more trouble getting a identification based on their skin color. It's just ridiculous, man. But it's a lie to say that Republicans are restricting access. Now, they are talking about shortening the three major things that Republicans want. One, they want voter ID. I just went into that. Secondly, they want to shorten the time of early voting, and they want to get more back to day of voting. Early voting, I believe, is probably already left, is like the horse left the barn. There's going to be early voting. Now, I can tell you that early voting, because Democrats are, even in this bill, they're talking about trying to take the money out of politics. Let me just tell you, whether you're for or against early voting doesn't matter in this sense. Early voting, and this is absolute fact, costs a lot more money. Not just in the government running of it, but candidates themselves have to spend a lot more money in early voting. Because basically the way campaigns used to work, and I've worked on many of them, and the way they used to, and it doesn't matter what state you're in, they work essentially this way. You raise money, and you spend most of your money in the last 30 days up to the election. Before that, you're mainly just amassing money, use things for infrastructure, you use stuff for signage, that kind of thing. But the advertisement of TV and direct mailing is the most expensive thing in radio as well, to advertise for an election, for a candidate. The earlier you have voting, the more they have to spend when that starts. It used to be that they would do an absentee ballot chase. Every state has slightly different rules, but essentially they had people would have absentee ballots, would go out, they would have a day when they would start coming in, and people would spend money directly on chasing what they call absentee ballots. Then they would start spending up to election day. Just to give you an example, like mail pieces, or is probably still, even to this day, one of the most effective ways to reach voters directly. Because even if they pick it up and throw it in the trash, they got to handle it and see your name and that kind of thing. Traditionally, mail-in voting is you do a minimum of 3 pieces. If you don't do 3 pieces, you might as well not do any, according to every research I've ever done, both personally and professionally. The first piece is basically an intro piece. Hi, I'm John Martin, and I'm running for dog catcher. The second piece is an issue piece, or issues. Usually you don't want more than 1 or 2 that you think are driving force. This is the reason why I'm running. So first, hi, I'm running. Secondly, here's the main reason why I'm running, what I want to do. And the third piece is basically just, hey, it's time to vote. Well, if you extend that over a month period, it means you got to do 4 or 5 pieces, or you got to do chopped up pieces. It costs a lot more money. So anyone who tells you that they're for taking money out of politics, at the same time extending early voting and expanding mail-in voting, either don't know what they're talking about, or they're just lying. Back to the article. Both parties have mobilized for the fight in unprecedented ways, reflecting the immense public attention on election issues. I hope that's true. I hope the public is paying attention to election issues. We know that half Americans don't even pay attention to elections, period. They don't even vote. They don't even register to vote. And think about this. It's a huge turnout if 85%, let's say, of people turn out that are eligible to vote, turn out to vote. But keep in mind, even that means that half the country, over half, doesn't even vote at all, which is a shame. Thanks to Trump's months-long campaign of falsehoods, they say, and this is what the article is saying, and the subsequent attack on the Capitol, as well as stakes for the 2020 midterm elections. Let me tell you, now, when it comes to like the attack on the Capitol, I'm not condoning any aspect of it whatsoever. But the frustration that many people, of course, Trump supporters, probably at the highest level of that, feel about the elections is not because Donald Trump kept saying, because we don't say the F word or we don't say the outright S word here. We talk about voter mod because we don't want to, algorithm, praise to algorithm. And we talk about stopping the squeal, and you can figure out what that rhymes with. But it wasn't Donald Trump's incitement, because he did just the opposite, right? Go down and peacefully and patriotically protest. I blame, if there's any one entity to blame, I would blame the Supreme Court of the United States of America, because they didn't do their job now twice. Once back during the election, when they should have taken up the case, the Texas case. Now, all these other things about Dominion software, all of that, I'm not saying that's not legitimate stuff. I'm not saying that dead people voting in other states, like in Florida, it happens a lot. We got people from, say, New York vote in New York and here, that kind of thing. I'm not saying that all of that isn't a factor. And I'm not even saying that the gigantic vote by mail, as some people call it, cheat by mail, wasn't a factor. But the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is if the Texas case had been heard by the Supreme Court, and keep in mind, most of these cases, they talk about, Trump lost this and that. Most of them never actually got to the point of hearing evidence. And the Supreme Court is supposed to arbitrate any conflicts between the states according to the Constitution. And they wouldn't even hear the evidence. Had they heard the evidence, because the thrust of the Texas case was what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, the constitutionality of who can change election laws, and it's only the state legislature. So any changes to election law, I don't care if you feel like they were justified or not for the pandemic, any changes that were done outside of the legislative process are therefore unconstitutional and should not have counted. Now, as I say, all this other software stuff, Dominion, everything else, cheating, the big mail-in, if those votes had been tossed, Donald Trump would be the duly elected president of the United States of America. I don't think there's really any doubt about that. So I blame the Supreme Court in two cases. One, they didn't take up the Texas case and listen to the evidence, which was their duty. And that frustrated and angered a lot of people. Because if you think about it, if you're trying to work the system, and I'm not condoning violence, but if you're saying, okay, I want to work the system, and you can't even get your grievances addressed, I'm not saying they had to side with them. I think they would have, is why they didn't want to take it up, by the way, because they lacked the cojones, if you will. They cowards. They didn't want to influence the election, which was their job, to actually not influence the election, but follow the Constitution. So you had the frustration of not even getting your grievances addressed. It has been compounded now by the Supreme Court. We did a show about this a week or so ago. Check it out. Go to our YouTube channel. Spell it out, John Martin Talks. You can see us there. Of course, our Facebook page, John Martin Talks. Like it, share it with others. And remember, as I talked about Recoil TV, also we're archived on America's Voice News. We're not on there live anymore, but we're on America's Voice News, a great alternative to the mainstream media. They got a free app on your Android, your iPhone. They're on Roku, Fire Stick, Apple TV, Channel 219, Dish Network, and the Pluto channel. Go to their streaming service, click on it, look at the shows tab, click on that, and you will see our show archived there on a daily basis. But not only, so back to the story, not only, take a quick sip here, get long-winded, right? Billy Bob says, get on with it. He's my psychic sidekick, by the way, Billy Bob Bass. Some of us are sicker than others, and that probably, I'm a fish whisperer. But he has a Twitter handle. It's at Billy Bob Bass 1, and mine is at John Martin Talks. But so going back to the Texas case before the Supreme Court would not see the evidence, which was their constitutional duty. So people were frustrated by that. Then it was compounded just a couple of weeks ago, and this is where I was talking about my podcast. Check it out. When the Supreme Court refused to take up the challenges of the various election laws that were violated on a state-by-state basis. There were half a dozen cases, and they blanketly refused to even look at them. So if you think about frustration, if you go those two cases, so on the one hand, your grievance was not addressed for leading up to the election. And now your grievances are not only not addressed, but the problem that everybody really that has any knowledge of the Constitution would acknowledge is a problem. The Supreme Court refused to even address that, which wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. I think they were worried about it might change the unity. But how are we going to unify if we don't have our grievances addressed and then we don't have any solutions to the obvious problems? It's just crazy. So I blame the Supreme Court. State lawmakers are barreling ahead with major rollbacks, back to the article, of early voting, mail voting, and other state provisions that Trump and other Republicans opposed, while the Supreme Court on Tuesday heard a challenge to Arizona's election laws that could further curtail the federal government's power to police elections. The federal government is not supposed to be policing elections. They are state-run. And it said here, so if the states, here's the thing, I may or may not agree with the changes, but if the state of Georgia wants to change their election laws and go the way of Stacey Abrams, I would oppose it 100%. But that would be their right if they follow through with the state legislatures. Elections have consequences. You know, these Democrats are always talking about trying to save democracy, but they don't believe in the democracy at the state level, because if they did, they'd be on the same side as the Republicans and me. But you're never going to see, and this is an excellent example, you're never going to see bipartisanship the way you think it should be. So bipartisanship, I understand what the textbook says, you know, Republicans and Democrats work together. But in reality, bipartisanship means Republicans cave. Now, they may ultimately cave to this. God, I hope not, because if they do, it's all over. And I'll talk about that more in just a second. But the Democrats are never going to bipartisanly support free and fair elections and that the Republicans won't, because you can name a bunch of times when Democrats were adamantly for something, Republicans were opposed to it, and Republicans went the other way and caved to the Democrats. I can't think of one time when the Democrats, I said, I didn't mean it, slip of the tongue there, Democrats were actually opposed to something the Republicans were for and had a change of heart. So, you know, them old them old effers in the Republicans, they're actually right and went that way. You tell me. I still hadn't seen it. But state lawmakers are barreling ahead at saying here. Actually, what state lawmakers are trying to do is follow the Constitution. Now, there's a radical idea. The opposing efforts have created a remarkable split screen between the hurried GOP drive under the state capitals and the significant Democratic push in Washington. Well, the Democratic push in Washington is basically anti-constitutional. Because keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this is something people just don't teach this anymore. That's why I'm battling ignorance and apathy on a daily basis here. Because the Constitution was not designed to empower the federal government. Let me say that again. The Constitution was never designed to empower the federal government. If anything, it's just the opposite. The Constitution was formulated to protect the God-given inalienable rights of the individual, the rugged individualist, from being taken away by an overreach of the federal government. And this bill that Pelosi is pushing, and the Democrats in general pushing, is an overreach, and it's unconstitutional, and they just don't want to face that. But it says here, with both parties seeing election laws as a crucial factor in determining outcomes and as a motivating issue for their base of support. So what exactly is the base of support for the Democratic Party? Well, I'm going to play you a series of videos here, a couple of them, that'll show you two different Democratic leaders that were both being mentioned as actually running for president in place of Biden, and may end up doing it in the future, although one of them I'll play is probably too damaged. We'll get into that in a moment. But here's their base of support. First, I'm going to play Michelle Obama right after Mr. Obama, Barack Obama, actually secured the nomination for the Democratic Party when he won enough elector or delegates to secure the nomination. This is what she said on that great evening when we had the first black nominee for president by any major party. Check it out.
I don't think we've seen that. But what we've learned over this year is that hope is making a comeback. It is making a comeback, and let me tell you something. For the first time in my adult lifetime, I'm really proud of my country. And not just because
first time
Barack has done well.
Think about that. Here's a woman, and I'm not knocking her, I'm just pointing out the facts. She has risen to the top of her professional field. She's, I guess, a highly respected lawyer at that time. Her and her husband were on the verge of taking the presidency, becoming the first lady, her, in the White House. Yet this is the first time. Now, she's raised a couple of kids, you know, they were well on their way. The Obamas appear to be pretty good parents and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not even talking about their politics. But here is Obama, Barack Obama, has risen from relative obscurity all the way to being a state senator, then a U.S. senator, then a keynote speaker at the Democratic National Convention, which the Clintons put him forward on that. And then on the verge of being the first African-American nominated by a major party for president. And she says this is the first time that she's been proud of her country. Are you really going to say that, considering all that has been accomplished, even in your own family? I mean, my God, her husband, as I said, look at what he had accomplished. I don't say you have to like Obama, but what he had accomplished is pretty amazing, considered he came from a broken home and everything else. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yet this is the first time they've been proud. So only if they win
are they proud of their country. And then I'm going to play another one. This is a video of Andrew Cuomo, who's certainly, and we talked a lot about him yesterday. Check out our podcast, as I told you, various ways to do that. Remember our sponsors. Check them out. But Andrew Cuomo, and when I want you to hear what he's saying in this speech, I'm going to play about a minute of it, and think about, as he's saying this, his family history is one of immigrants coming here with essentially nothing
and rising to the top to where his father was governor. He's governor. His father was almost the Democratic nominee for president. And his brother, Chris, is like one of the top political pundits, one of the most highly paid people on TV on CNN. I'm not saying you have to like him, but I would say that the Cuomo story is a story of the American dream. I don't see how you could possibly say it different. But listen to what Andrew Cuomo, Mario's probably ashamed of this, God rest his soul, but listen to what Andrew Cuomo said about America's greatness. Check it out.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great.
It was never that great. That's enough. Think about that. As I just said, the Cuomo story shows how great America is. Just the opposite. Michelle Obama said the first time she's ever been proud, her story is the American dream. Cuomo's is the American dream. Yet they're saying that, they got to play to their base. Well, what is your base when you have people who have accomplished so much and still don't think America was ever great now? Not great again, but ever great. And it's the first time you've ever been proud of it. I don't know, but that's hard. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that I left the Democratic Party over a decade ago. I used to be a Democrat, old Southern Democrat. First person I ever voted for president, though, was Ronald Reagan. So that probably tells you where I was. But I just couldn't take it anymore. I could not take the insanity of the Democratic Party. I'm not saying that the Republicans have all the answers, but at least there are a handful of people willing to ask tough, true questions. House leaders anticipate near unanimous Democratic support. I would agree with that. Maybe not in the Senate. And zero Republican backing for their bill known as H.R. 1 or the For the People Act. For the People Act. Yeah. That would overhaul elections, campaign finance, and government ethics law. Some liberal lawmakers are pushing to ditch the filibuster rules to pass it into law without Republican support. For the People Act. It's an F word, but we're not going to say it, act. But government ethics law. So let me ask you this. Where do you turn for your ethics? I'd be willing to bet you don't turn to political figures on either side of the aisle for your ethics. If you are, you are. But I wanted to make sure that I was understanding ethics the way I think it means. So I looked up the definition. Ethics. Moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Do you really look to Congress? I don't care what party you're in or no party. Do you actually look to Congress for your ethical guidelines? Maybe to say, well, that ain't right. I can understand. Keep in mind that Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, actually have a slush fund in Congress, your taxpayer dollars, to pay off people for sexual assaults, sexual harassment suits, and everything else. They have a slush fund of your money. And these people are going to talk about ethics. I'm sorry, man. I don't look at political figures as a place to get my ethics. So they're not part of that, man. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and boy, is she the queen of ethics. I mean, she said, this is what she said. And when you think of ethics, don't you think of her? She's like the queen of it. She said, what we want to do is clear the air of that big, dark money, clear the air of political gerrymandering, and clear the air of voter suppression that is out there. She's talking about Republicans. They know that their issues are losers with the American people. They know that big money and voter suppression is this is Nancy Pelosi, their path to victory, and that's why they're engaged in this. Well, the Democratic Party is the party of billionaires. All the top billionaires are all behind the Democratic Party. I mean, they're the party of the poor and they're the party of the billionaires. By the way, if you're the party of the poor, what do you need more of? Poor people. So keep that in mind. But it's unbelievable that the audacity these people have. Ethics, no. Audacity, yes. Among the dozens of state legislatures considering sweeping new laws that would restrict voter options, actually, if you look at it, all they're trying to do in place, because they talk about Georgia has gotten the most attention, all they're trying to do is return to the original laws they had before the pandemic panicked everybody. They're not trying to make radical changes. They're trying to shore up the integrity of the election. Georgia has garnered outsized attention in part because of the state's leading role in the 2020 election. Trump fixated on his narrow loss there, and while state Republican leaders rebutted accusations that the fraud, that I can't say the F word even in the article, the mod, we call it mod, we don't say the F word here, had played a role in the outcome, GOP lawmakers said their proposals are needed to restore faith in the election process among Trump supporters. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, it's real tempting to focus on the mod, let's say, of dead people voting, or the mod, if there is some, of these machines, Dominion machines. And I'm not downplaying any of that. But the fact is, in Georgia, let's use Georgia as the example. The fact is that if Georgia had simply followed the election laws of the state, Donald Trump would have won that going away, and so would have Perdue and Loeffler in the Senate. And I can give you one clear-cut example of that. As I say, to have anything change election laws outside of the legislative process, not the Secretary of State with Stacey Abrams and a consent agreement or the governor, none of that. The only constitutional way to change election laws is in the state legislature, and clearly Georgia didn't do that, right? So Dominion, dead people voting, the whole cheat by mail, all of that. If the actual election laws of Georgia were followed out, and I'm going to give you the proof in just a second, Donald Trump would have won going away, and so would Perdue and Loeffler. And here's the only thing you really need to see that. Before they did this consent decree with Stacey Abrams, the average rate of rejection of an absentee, a mail-in vote, due to conflicting signatures or not filled out correctly or not mailed in on time, the average toss-out rate was 6%. So in a normal year, they toss out 6% in Georgia consistently of mail-in voting. Do you know what when this year in 2020, when they had hundreds of thousands of votes by mail that they've never had before from this consent decree it was unconstitutional. What was the rejection rate then? So 6% normally in a Georgia election with mail-in voting, 6%. The rejection rate when they had hundreds of thousands more was 1/3%. Not even 1%. So I think it's pretty clear that if they had had the election laws followed in the state of Georgia as they were constitutionally supposed to do, and they maintained that 6%, let's say they cut it down 2 or 3%, like 5 or 4%, Donald Trump would have certainly won Georgia. I don't think there's any question about it. Voting issues dominated the annual conservative CPAC they're talking about this past week in Orlando, where presenter after presenter repeated unsubstantiated and in some cases disproved claims that widespread mod, don't say the F word, occurred in November. But unsubstantiated claims, the reason they're unsubstantiated is because the various courts, including, as I said, the Supreme Court, didn't actually follow the Constitution and even hear the evidence. It's hard to say evidence is substantiated or not if you don't actually hear it. It's just crazy, man. And no one really talks about that. But such as carloads of illegal ballots, this is some of the accusations they say people made, being dumped at counting facilities. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I just told you about the election laws and how they would have turned the election if they'd been followed in Georgia. I want to play you just one video that shows you all you need to know about whether or not there was shenanigans, let's put it that, in elections. This is from Detroit, Michigan, when they were counting the ballots and they were supposed to have the public be able to see it, especially the poll watchers from the various parties. Look at what they did in Detroit to keep people from watching what they were doing. Check it out.
It is the blue wave is
No,
African American.
that's not the right one. Sorry.
It's white. It's Latino.
No, it's the one that says boarding up Michigan vote count. Thought I put it up. Good. All right, well, we'll come back to that if we can. But in Michigan, here we go. This is it. Now, do you see what's happening there? That big room is where they're counting the ballots, and the people are trying to watch what is happening, and they boarded it up. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that you board up something if you don't want people to see what you're doing. And so I'm sure that there was some shenanigans going on there, because people don't mind you seeing what you're doing when you're doing the right thing, do they? That video alone, to me, explains a lot. All right, let's keep going. The Republican National Committee, meanwhile, has started a committee on election integrity. Let me check my time. I've got a couple minutes left. Meeting in recent weeks, and will act as a clearinghouse for suggestions to state GOP committees on how to change U.S. election law. I got a radical idea. Why don't we just follow the actual Constitution? There's your solution right there. Follow the Constitution. You don't need to make all kind of different changes. Follow the Constitution. And let me just kind of scroll down here a little bit, because we're kind of running out of time. I want to get down to this, talking about Donald Trump when he was at CPAC. It says Sunday, his much anticipated, talking about President Trump, return to political stage. He said that this bill, he's talking about this bill, would be a disaster for Republicans, and highlighted provisions such as elimination of voter ID requirements, implementation of automatic voter restriction, and mandated nonpartisan redistricting. I want to cover that very quickly, because the states, by the state legislature, once again, pretty much in every state, they decide where the congressional districts. Now, Congress, or at the federal level, depending on population, you can win more seats, like representative seats, or less, depending on shifts in population. Florida's about to get more congressional seats, and places like New York and maybe California, that their population is falling, are going to lose seats. So the state legislatures in, say, Florida, I'll just use Florida's example, are the ones that determine what those seats are going to look like. And there are some restrictions and those things, but generally speaking, they can determine that. Now, these Democrats are constantly saying that, they want to save democracy, save democracy. Well, keep in mind that in spite of all that happened, Donald Trump not getting enough ballots to be in the White House, no Maud there, not saying that, but in spite of all that, that no single Republican legislature was flipped. They all that were, and they even gained a few. So in other words, the state legislatures that were in Republicans' hands are still in Republicans' hands. So that gives them the constitutional right to district or redistrict or draw the maps as they see fit. Elections have consequences. So what this bill is trying to do is federalize something that the local people, it doesn't get much more local than electing your local state legislator. They are trying to overturn the will of the people in their states, and we cannot let this happen. He said, Mr. Trump said, the monster must be stopped. It cannot be allowed to pass. Let me check my time. I've got a few minutes left. This, ladies and gentlemen, is coming down to what I've been telling you for months now, for the last year. It is between freedom versus tyranny. That's what this is. And this push by the Democrats is to make sure that they codify a state of tyranny, and you cannot let it happen. And people are always asking me, well, what do the Democrats really want? And I'm always telling you to take them at their word. Take them at their word. And that is, for instance, listen to what the armed wing of the Democratic Party, Antifa, says about whether or not we should have borders or walls, no USA at all. Let's play that.
No borders, no walls, no USA at all. No borders.
As I tell you all the time, take these progressives at their word. They're chanting there, no borders, no walls, no USA at all. And that's exactly what we're going to have, no USA at all, if these Democrats get their way. And people are always asking me about secession, whether we should secede or not. And I've been saying all along, I'm not for secession. I don't think it's gotten to that point by any stretch. But I can tell you, I understand the frustration. And I think you're going to see states exercise their regional, join up regional like Florida and Texas and all that, my Gulf Alliance, as I call it. But if this bill passes and becomes the law of the land, I think you could actually see people moving towards secession, because if you're conservative, you would have literally no voice in America at all, period. And all right, we're going to move on. We only got a few minutes left. I got to show you this next story. It comes from USA Today. It is a tragedy. I want to say that flat out. First of all, the loss of life here is horrendous, and it is a tragedy. And, you know, I pray for the families, the victims, and the people that are still in the hospital trying to recover completely. But I think that you could lay this on the feet of the Democrats. Listen to this. This is a USA Today story. Very sad. At least 13 people dead after truck slams into SUV carrying 25 near U.S.-Mexico border. Is down in, there's the scene of the crash right there. Hopeville, California. At least 13 people died after an SUV packed with dozens of passengers collided with a semi-truck. It was the SUV's fault. They pulled out in front of the truck near the U.S.-Mexican border Tuesday, according to California Highway Patrol officials. California Highway Patrol Division Chief Omar Watson said the crash involved a big rig hauling two trailers, so a tandem truck, and a Ford Expedition, which is basically a big SUV, carrying 25 people. Now, this thing is supposed to hold 6 people. It was carrying 25 people. The seats were all removed out of it except the driver and the passenger seat. 25 people. Can you imagine being packed up in that vehicle? It wasn't immediately clear whether the SUV was carrying migrants 10 miles from the border. They're pretty much all Mexican, all Hispanic, who crossed the border. The driver was the only one really been identified, ferrying farm workers to fields, or was being used for some other purpose. It seems pretty clear to me, you know. It walks like a duck, right? A preliminary report of the crash released late Tuesday by the Highway Patrol said the SUV, driven by a 28-year-old resident of Mexico, entered the intersection right in front of the truck. 12 people died at the scene, including the SUV driver. Another one died at the hospital. Listen to this. The ages of those involved in the crash range from 15 to 53. So there were quite a few minors in this. I don't know how many of them to break down to kill. The Democrats don't care. I'm just going to put it to you. I'm just going to speak. You're looking for political correctness, you're in the wrong spot. The Democrats don't care. Think about this. I think it's fair to assume that the vast majority of people in that vehicle were here illegally. I don't think that's a big shot. The driver of that truck was an American citizen, apparently, driving his big rig. Now, all of those people shouldn't have even been here. I always hear, well, you know, there's no evidence of crime, illegal immigrants do this. If you're here illegally and you commit a crime, then that crime is certainly preventable because you're here illegally and you shouldn't be here in the first place. I feel sorry for all of the victims of this. I feel sorry for the truck driver. I pray that he survived. I pray they all survive that are still living. But think about that truck driver. He's just doing his job, and now he not only has he got to recover from serious injuries, hopefully he will, but he's got to live with that, even though it wasn't his fault, the image of him killing 15 people. It's absolutely crazy, man. People don't think about that. You have to live with that. Biden once said that he don't believe felony DUI is a felony. Well, if your loved one was killed by someone here illegally that was driving a vehicle while drunk, you got to live with that. It's crazy, man. But I like how they say 10 of the victims were Mexicans, confirmed Roberto Velasco, Director of North American Affairs for Mexico's Foreign Relations Department. But there's no emergency situation at the border, right? None. You got 25, but think about this. How desperate And I've told you many times, if I was living in Guatemala and I had a shot to come to the United States, I would do it too. So I don't blame them. But how desperate do you have to be to stack up 25 people and get in that vehicle? How desperate do you have to be? These are desperate people, and I don't blame them for they're desperate. I don't blame them. I blame Joe Biden and the Democrats who believe in open borders and a welfare state, and they're attracting these people in record numbers. That's who I blame, man. It's a heavy price to pay, but I blame them. Let me check my time here. We're pretty much out of time. Let me just say this one thing, and then we'll end. But right here, Dianne Feinstein says, my thoughts are with the families of all those involved, she announced on Twitter. My office is closely monitoring the situation as we learn more about the horrific crash. And she goes on to say all this. There's a couple of others they quote here, Democrats talking about how horrified they are. These are the same people that mock Republicans, mock conservatives, when they stand up and say they're praying for victims of shooting and gun violence and everything else. They mock them for that. Yet here they are praying, they say, and I'm not saying they're not. I'm not mocking them for praying. I'm just pointing out hypocrisy. Praying for these people. These people shouldn't even be here. The Democrats absolutely don't care. They're only interested in political power. I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please go directly to John Martin Talks Facebook page, like it, share it with others. Remember our YouTube channel, spell it all the way out, John Martin Talks. Please patronize our sponsors. Look above the video. You'll see links to those. But like I say each and every day, ladies and gentlemen, I'll pray for your family. You pray for mine. Let's all pray for this great nation because she deserves it and needs it now more than ever. But above all else, from my heart, from my family to yours, have a blessed day.